Have you ever stood witness to a moment when rationality seems to evaporate? When entire communities become possessed by an invisible psychological current that defies all logic? Mass hysteria is not merely a historical footnote or a rare psychological anomaly. It is a profound window into the human psyche's most vulnerable and volatile dimensions. The history of mass hysteria provides us with fascinating and often disturbing examples of how quickly rational thought can give way to collective delusion. The dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg stands as one of history's most bizarre mass hysteria events. It began in July 1518 when a woman named Frau Trophea began dancing feverishly in the street. Within a week, 34 others had joined her, dancing day and night without rest. By August, the number had swollen to 400, with many dancing themselves to death from heart attacks, exhaustion, and dehydration. Local physicians, completely baffled by the phenomenon, eventually advised that the only cure was to let the dancers continue until they exhausted themselves. The town council even set up a wooden stage and hired musicians, believing this would help the afflicted recover more quickly. Many dancers were taken to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, hoping for divine intervention. The epidemic lasted for about 3 months, claiming dozens of lives. As historian John Waller notes, many of the dancers were in a state of unconsciousness and could not stop themselves until they collapsed from exhaustion. The Cat Nuns of France, 1844, offers another startling example of confined hysteria. At a French convent, a young nun began meowing like a cat. Within days, other nuns joined in, and soon the entire convent was filled with the sound of meowing nuns. The meowing would last for several hours each day, alarming the surrounding community. The behavior spread so widely that soldiers were eventually called in to threaten the nuns with whipping if they didn't stop. Only this drastic measure finally ended the daily chorus of meows, as documented by Charles Mackay in Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. This case demonstrates how even the most absurd behaviors can become contagious in closed environments. The Halifax slasher panic of 1938 gripped the English town of Halifax for 2 weeks. Reports began circulating of a mysterious man attacking people with a mallet and razor-sharp buckles. The first victim, Mary Gledhill, reported being attacked by a man with shining buckles on his shoes. Within days, more victims came forward with similar stories, each adding new details to the attacker's description. The town descended into chaos. Vigilante groups formed, businesses closed early, and streets emptied after dark. Men were attacked by angry mobs after being mistakenly identified as the slasher. The panic only ended when Scotland Yard investigators proved that all the reported attacks were fabricated. As chronicled by Detective Percy Silito, the investigation revealed how mass hysteria had transformed ordinary citizens into both phantom attackers and imaginary victims. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon, 1944, terrorized the small Illinois town of Mattoon for 2 weeks. Residents reported a mysterious figure spraying toxic gas through their windows at night, causing symptoms like nausea, vomiting, and paralysis. The first victim, Urban Raef, reported that he and his wife had been overcome by a sweet-smelling gas that left them paralyzed. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 24 similar attacks were reported. The town was gripped by fear. People sealed their windows, armed themselves, and formed neighborhood patrols. Despite extensive police investigation, no physical evidence of a gas-wielding attacker was ever found. As sociologist Donald Johnson later documented, the combination of wartime anxiety, summer heat, and industrial pollution likely contributed to both real physical symptoms and mass panic. The Tanganyika Laughter Epidemic of 1962 remains one of the most peculiar cases of mass hysteria in modern history. It began at a mission-run girls' school in Kashasha, Tanzania, when 3 girls started laughing uncontrollably. Within hours, the laughter had spread to 95 of the 159 students, aged 12 to 18. The laughing episodes would last from a few hours to 16 days, accompanied by crying, fainting, and screaming. The symptoms were so severe that the school was forced to close on March 18, 1962. When affected students returned to their home villages, the laughter spread to neighboring communities. By May, a neighboring school for girls had closed, and by June, the epidemic had reached Nshamba, a village 55 miles away. In total, about 1,000 people were affected, and 14 schools were forced to close. The epidemic lasted an astounding 18 months, making it one of the longest recorded cases of mass hysteria. The Seattle Windshield pitting epidemic of 1954 showcases how easily mass hysteria can affect an entire modern city. The incident began in March, when residents of Bellingham, Washington reported tiny holes mysteriously appearing in their car windshields. By April 15th, the phenomenon had spread to Seattle, where police received hundreds of reports daily about damaged windshields. The panic reached such proportions that President Eisenhower was briefed on the situation. Theories about the cause ranged from cosmic rays to sand flea eggs to nuclear testing. Local resident Betty Schobert told reporters, "I hadn't noticed any marks on my windshield before, but when I looked today, it was covered with them." As investigators would later determine, most of the damage was normal wear and tear that people had simply never noticed before. The epidemic ended as suddenly as it began, when Mayor Alan Pomeroy held a press conference suggesting that the pitting was caused by normal factors. Sociologist Alan Bortner's study of the incident revealed how suggestion and heightened attention can create a crisis out of virtually nothing. The June Bug Epidemic of 1962 presents a fascinating case of workplace mass hysteria. At a dressmaking department of a U.S. textile factory, a worker reported being bitten by a mysterious bug, developing severe symptoms including numbness and nausea. Within hours, 62 workers reported similar symptoms, despite no evidence of any insect infestation. The factory had to be shut down repeatedly as waves of symptoms spread through the workforce. Entomologists called to investigate found no bugs that could cause such symptoms. Industrial psychologist Alan Kirchhoff's detailed study revealed that those affected were under particular stress from production line pressures. Additionally, most victims worked in the same department and shared similar social networks. The Pokémon Seizure Panic of 1997 demonstrates how mass media can trigger widespread hysteria. On December 16, 1997, thousands of Japanese children reported various symptoms while watching an episode of Pokémon. The episode, Denno Senshi Porygon, contained a sequence with rapidly flashing lights that allegedly triggered seizures in some viewers. The initial reports sparked a nationwide panic. Over 12,000 children reported symptoms ranging from seizures to temporary blindness. Media coverage was intense, with some outlets calling it Pokémon shock. However, follow-up studies revealed that only a small number of children had experienced genuine photosensitive seizures. Most reported symptoms were the result of mass hysteria. The incident led to new guidelines for animation in Japan and demonstrated the power of television to trigger mass psychological responses. The mechanisms behind mass hysteria are complex but follow recognizable patterns. Psychiatrist Simon Wesley explains, "Mass hysteria is characterized by the rapid spread of conversion disorder, a condition involving the appearance of bodily symptoms in the absence of organic cause. Several key factors typically contribute to the development of mass hysteria. Pre-existing anxiety or stress in the community serves as fertile ground for mass hysteria. As psychologist Gordon Allport noted, the more anxious the population, the more ready it is to panic. A triggering event that captures public attention acts as the spark. These triggers can be as varied as strange sounds, unusual smells, or mysterious illnesses. Sometimes, as social psychologist Stanley Milgram observed, the trigger need not be real. It need only be perceived as real by enough people. Rapid communication of symptoms or fears amplifies the effect." Sociologist Earl Bebby explains, "The speed at which information, or misinformation, spreads is directly proportional to the potential for mass hysteria. Cultural beliefs provide a framework for the hysteria." Anthropologist Victor Turner noted that mass hysteria often takes forms that are culturally specific, drawing on existing fears and beliefs within a society. Media coverage can either mitigate or amplify the phenomenon. As communications theorist Marshall McLuhan observed, "The medium is the message, and in cases of mass hysteria, the medium can become part of the madness." The role of technology in modern mass hysteria deserves special attention. Social media platforms can transmit panic across continents in minutes, while echo chambers reinforce and amplify collective fears. Psychologist Sherry Turkle observes, "Social media doesn't just spread mass hysteria faster, it creates new forms of it. We're seeing digital manifestations of age-old psychological phenomena. The viral spread of information has created what media theorist Henry Jenkins calls spreadable media, content that moves through culture in unpredictable and often uncontrollable ways. This has profound implications for how mass hysteria develops and propagates in the digital age. Modern manifestations include cryptocurrency manias, where entire populations become convinced of imminent wealth, health-related panics that spread through social networks before medical facts can be established, viral challenges that encourage dangerous behavior, often leading to actual harm, QAnon and similar conspiracy theories that spread rapidly through digital networks, the Tide Pod Challenge phenomenon, which demonstrated how social media could turn a clearly dangerous activity into a trend, and the Momo Challenge panic, which spread globally despite being largely fictional. The psychology of mass hysteria reveals fascinating patterns about human nature. As psychologist Carl Jung noted, the collective mind of the crowd is capable of incredible feats of both creation and destruction. Several psychological mechanisms contribute to mass hysteria: social contagion, which psychologist Nicholas Christakis describes as the tendency for behaviors and emotions to spread through networks of people like a virus; confirmation bias, where people selectively interpret information to confirm their existing fears. As psychologist Daniel Kahneman notes, the confidence people have in their beliefs is not a measure of the quality of evidence, but of the coherence of the story that the mind has managed to construct. Group polarization drives people to more extreme positions when surrounded by others who share their beliefs. Social psychologist Irving Janis termed this groupthink, the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. The role of authority figures is crucial. As Stanley Milgram's famous experiments showed, people are remarkably willing to follow authority, even when it contradicts their own judgment. During mass hysteria events, authority figures can either amplify or dampen the panic. The digital age has created what sociologist Manuel Castells calls networks of outrage and hope, interconnected groups that can rapidly spread both panic and its antidote. Understanding these networks is crucial for managing modern mass hysteria. Sociologist Zeynep Tufekci warns, "Our networked world makes us more vulnerable to mass hysteria than ever before, but it also gives us tools to combat it, if we learn to use them wisely." As we navigate an increasingly connected world, our susceptibility to mass hysteria may be greater than ever, but so too is our ability to recognize and resist it. The choice, as always, lies with each of us: to be swept along by the tide of collective fear or to maintain our rational anchor in stormy psychological seas. What mass hysteria events have you witnessed in your community? What current trends do you think might qualify as examples of mass hysteria? Share your observations and experiences. Let us conclude with the words of philosopher Bertrand Russell. "The fundamental cause of trouble in the world today is that the stupid is cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt." Perhaps the best defense against mass hysteria is maintaining that healthy doubt while helping others to do the same.